Have Chris Olave and the Saints wide receivers somehow gone a little underrated going into the 2025 season? We'll talk about that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Voglu, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott Vicknair Injury Lawyers. You've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott Vicknair handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. As we get closer to the NFL season, we'll definitely have a couple of positional battles to really dive into. Hopefully not any injuries, but with the Saints' luck, obviously that's something that we've kind of gotten used to. We'll have a little bit of more of a feel about what to expect from Kellen Moore's offense and Brandon Staley's defense, especially as we get closer to the preseason. I'd say the preseason, more than any other year for us Saints fans, is probably going to be riveting to the point where we're all going to be excited for those opening kickoffs. And I don't always say that for every preseason. Before we get there, though, obviously, you go through OTAs, mini camps. Obviously, we'll get close to training camp. And what I've noticed as we inch a little bit closer to week one is that one position group for the Saints that's been a really hot, really big hot topic, on Twitter has been the wide receiver room. A lot of fans asking for them to potentially sign Keenan Allen or Amari Cooper. But either way, regardless of which one you vouch for, it's become pretty apparent that Saints fans feel like, at least a certain amount of them, that they need to add a little bit more, let's just say, oomph to that wide receiver room. Whether it is a bigger bodied wide receiver like Keenan Allen, a vet like Amari Cooper, as I mentioned, or maybe even going outside of the box and not even going with one of them. So is it worth exploring those options? It's possible. But as we get closer to this year, I genuinely believe that Chris Olave is starting to reach the point, and I think most of it's due to injury, where I think he's actually severely underrated. Now, does Chris Olave's presence alone mean the Saints shouldn't go get some help? No, I'm not saying that. You can never have enough wide receivers. And if anyone ever feels like you can, I'm going to tell you no, because last year watching the Saints, I never felt like we were going to get into December where Dante Pettis and Kevin Austin Jr. and Marquez Valdes-Scantling were going to be your top three options. But lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So, Chris Olave's presence alone doesn't mean the Saints shouldn't go after more help. But what I would say about Chris Olave as we've reached this point right now is I look around the league, I see how people rank him, and Pro Football Focus put him as the 24th best receiver in the NFL. Guys that were ranked ahead of him, Ladd McConkey of the Chargers, DK Metcalf of the Steelers, Jalen Waddle of the Dolphins, Devontae Smith of the Eagles, Drake London of the rival Falcons, a couple of rookies in Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors, and it's tough to argue against those LSU boys. They certainly did their thing last year. But I see that number next to Olave, 24th in the league. And while Olave missed a lot of time this past year, didn't put up great numbers because of the injuries and the concussions, I see that number and I start to feel like, man, there's no way a healthy version of Chris Olave is only the 24th best receiver in the NFL. Do I think he will ever reach that top 10 number? I don't know, but I would like to think that Chris Olave, when healthy, and for the first two seasons of his career when he was healthy, gave them 1,000 yards as a rookie, then over 1,100 yards in 2023, despite not being on the same page as Derek Carr. I can't see this guy not being better than Ladd McConkey or Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith. Like, I think he's better than guys in that class. And while I understand the ranking, and this isn't me trying to dunk on PFF, and I'm not going to do that because I understand why they did it. Olave literally missed half the season last year. I feel like we look at this Saints wide receiver room and there are concerns about the lack of depth, but I see Olave as a guy that if this man can just stay freaking healthy, he can really anchor that unit. And maybe we'll get to see a version of Chris Olave in what should be the best scheme of his career so far, where he could have 1,300, 1,400 yards receiving. And maybe 1,400 yards might seem a bit ambitious given we don't even know who his starting quarterback is going to be. I would say, look at his first two seasons. His first year was Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston as his quarterback, and then his second year, Derek Carr, where they weren't on the same page. And this man is more than capable of going 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards in those first 2 years, respectively. So, do I think Chris Olave is a bona fide number one yet? No, I still think he would have to prove that. But, man, 24th in the league, I see that number, and I'm starting to think, man, I think people are sleeping on Chris Olave, and I hope this is the year, if he's fully healthy and he avoids the injuries, and of course the concussions are the main concern, where he could have that breakout party. And it would be beneficial, obviously, for him not just because you want to be great, but this is the year. If Olave plays well, whether it's from the Saints or another team in this league, he's going to get paid handsomely at some point because he'll be due for that extension next year. So we'll see what happens with Chris Olave. I definitely feel, though, as we get closer to week 1, my excitement surrounding this player is going to keep going up. And I think it's natural for people to start forgetting about certain players because they miss time. But you look at this Saints offense, I do think they lack a lot of depth in when it comes to skill players. I do believe that number 12 is going to be a problem for opposing teams. Now, the Saints wide receiver group as a whole, and I mentioned as a start, I do think it needs work, but I saw a stat come across this week that kind of changed my perception of how I feel about this team. And I know this is going to be premature, and this all hinges on health. But Mina Kimes, who's I think one of the better analysts in the business, pointed out that Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed were in the top 5 in burst last year. That next-gen stat measures how fast wide receivers are in their first seconds of their route. So Olave was number 1. Funny enough, MVS was number 2. And then Rashid Shaheed was number 5. And this is not for the Saints. This is league-wide. And again, depth is the name of the game. Health is the name of the game. And, availability is the most important ability. But when we look at this Saints offense, if this offensive line does what I believe they can do, and I think this can be a top 10 unit just from talent alone with Fuaga and Banks and McCoy, see what happens with Penning if he shines at left guard. If not, well, they'll figure it out. Ruiz at right guard. I think this could be a top 10 offensive line. And if that is a top 10 offensive line and you're running the football well and you're protecting for your quarterback, Olave and Shaheed, who, as I just mentioned, both ranked in the top 5 in burst with Olave being number 1, if they're creating separation, they're really quick out of their routes out of the gate, there's going to be that ability and that opening to have explosive plays down the field. And this doesn't mean that, the win total for the Saints changes, but there's this concept that the Saints are going to be god-awful and boring this year. And maybe they will be. It's June 4th. Who the hell knows what's going to happen between now and when the season begins in September. But I see those numbers. I look at this talented offensive line that could be able to block for whether it's Tyler Shuck or Spencer Rattler. And I think, man, if you could just tell me that Olave and Shaheed are healthy for 17 games, and that's a big ask, and, it's one that I don't believe is going to come to fruition. I know they'll miss time at some point. This offense could put up numbers. This offense could at least have 2 playmakers capable of making every game exciting for us Saints fans to watch. But even outside of them, right, because 2 players aren't going to do it alone, Brandon Cooks is going to be an X factor for this team as well. I don't know which version of Brandon Cooks is going to show up, but if it's a 2023 version, then at least the Saints will have some semblance of a wide receiver trio. Would it be dynamic as all hell? I don't know. I still think you're lacking that physical beast, like a prime Michael Thomas, who obviously isn't here anymore. But Brandon Cooks in 2023, 657 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns for the Cowboys. This past season, missed time due to injury, didn't have Dak Prescott for the full year because of his hamstring injury, 259 yards receiving, 3 touchdowns. If you're paying for Brandon Cooks from 2024, not really going to be a factor this year. But if he is closer to the 2023 Brandon Cooks, and he doesn't have to be a 650-yard receiver, by the way, just give me more than 250-something, because that is not going to cut it, especially for the number, the contract that they gave him this year. Maybe that can really, really give the Saints a better element of speed at that number 3 spot, maybe feel a little bit a little bit of the pressure relieved from Olave and Shaheed. So we'll see what happens there. But Cooks is another guy that, granted, not a guarantee. There is a 50-50. This could lean in the right direction. Maybe it leans in the wrong direction. I think the same can go for a guy like Bub Memes. I don't want to subscribe to the Bub Memes hype train where, I've seen some people say he's going to have like 600, 700 yards this year. I don't know. Maybe he does, but Bub Memes did have a game or 2 last year where I said, okay, that could be an NFL player for this team. Let's see how he does in preseason and training camp. Can he solidify himself as the number 4? Can he play well enough where the Saints don't feel like, hey, we really have to sign 1, maybe 2 receivers? So you look at those 2 guys, put that on top of the fact that I really, really do believe Olave and Shaheed are really good playmakers when healthy. Maybe this team can have an underrated wide receiver room. Because I have not been bullish about the Saints offense. I have spoke glowingly about the offensive line's talent. I've kind of tend towards the optimistic side of what this quarterback battle can be. Running back room, I don't love it outside of Alvin. Tight end group, I've said before, I don't like. But wide receiver room, I've kind of been on the fence about. And I don't know, maybe it's my call it a flip, whatever it may be. I look at this wide receiver room. I do believe they still need help, but maybe I was more critical on them, a month, 2 months ago, as opposed to where I am now. And I feel like maybe this group can be pretty decent for this Saints team. Again, they need work. It is not perfect, but when you see that stat that Olave and Shaheed are pretty much better than any other receiver in the league at kind of getting out of their routes quickly and creating separation, I don't know, man. I think that kind of excites the hell out of me. And in a new offense with Kellen Moore, who is going to want to, if he sets up the run, want to push the ball downfield as well, values crossing routes. I think those two guys can be lethal on that, especially Shaheed. Maybe we'll see what happens for this Saints team, but at least I'm cautiously optimistic, I'd say, about this squad. So we'll go from there. As I mentioned before, guys, this obviously isn't the busiest time of the year for the Saints. Your quarterback battle's been pretty good. Haven't heard a ton about this defense yet. It's still been pretty quiet. I'd say the focus has really been on the QBs and the O-line, but we'll have way more juicy material to talk about. But I legit looked at that stat this week, and you call it whatever the fuck you want to call it. But I was like, all right, maybe you can convince me to be a little bit excited about this wide receiver room. So I'm going to jump into any comments you guys have here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. If you guys put any comments here, put them in, and I'll get them up as part of our fan Q&A from Sunshine, your hometown John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. We'll start off with Manuel Garcia. Says it's maybe a little optimistic, but I don't think we're going to be as bad as everybody thinks. If everyone stays healthy, that's a big key. Health is for sure a big key for this Saints team. I still think they lack a lot of depth, and I think that's what might hurt them, and that's where your point is about the health being key. I talked about Olave. I believe Olave is entering underrated territory. If he were to miss time, like, who steps up? It's a huge question, but I do think if you told me the Saints' main players are healthy this year, I don't think they're going to be the worst team in the league. I don't even know if they'd be one of the 3 worst teams in the league. I just think that there's this overwhelming sense that they're going to be awful from the outside. But in reality, if you look at the Saints games last year, I mean, they were absolutely depleted, still won 5 games. I know a couple were in the beginning of the year, but I don't know. I maybe it's just the fandom in me trying to hold on here. Yes, Olave's very underrated. I mean, I'm with you. Look, like I said, I see that number next to his name, and I see the 24th ranked receiver in the league, and I don't think he's top 10, but it's hard to say that, right? Like, he's missed time, and there's just some great wide receivers in this league. But I look through the list, I see guys like Malik Neighbors ranked over him. I'm like, that's cool. Neighbors was a dog. And then I see, Devontae Smith, who I believe Olave is pretty similar, but I think he's better than him personally. I see Jalen Waddle, another receiver where he's good, but I personally think Olave's better. And I go, man, like, how quickly things turn if you miss time in the NFL. And that's kind of been the case. Chris, what's going on, man? Nothing much. Just trying to stay within the, I don't want to say the no, but stay on top of this Saints stuff going on. It's been fairly quiet the last week for Saints news. I think that's probably a good thing. We don't want any drama. Derek Carr officially retired this week, so I guess that's a thumbs up, although I still have a weird suspicion he'll be back at some point. Not with the Saints, but back in the NFL. But other than that, been a pretty quiet week. Outside stuff, obviously hectic. Life is, life's always getting in the way. But Saints-wise, it's been a little quiet, a little too quiet for a team that usually makes headlines for the wrong reasons. But I'll take that, man. Jaden saying, what's up, bro? What's going on, Jaden? Hope all's well, man. What are your feelings about the team after OTAs so far? A lot of my feelings are hinged on certain factors, right? Like, can Trevor Penning be a solid offensive guard? If he is, I mentioned it a million times, and you guys are going to get sick of me saying it. I think the Saints could have a really, really good offensive line this year. If Trevor Penning can start at guard and be good, I think they could have a great offensive line this year. Again, these are ifs, depending on things that I don't know are possible, but that's something about this team where I felt good going into OTAs. I feel even better now. Defensively, they're going to need a lot of work, but I've heard some pretty good things about Danny Stutzman. Who knows? Maybe he kind of adds a little bit of firepower to that front seven. Tackling machine at Oklahoma looks like he shot him out of a cannon every time he's playing downhill. So maybe he can be that X factor for this team at some point in the year. Maybe not immediately, but we'll see what happens with him. Wide receiver room seems like Olave and Shaheed are doing their thing. Not really surprised by that. Running backs, haven't heard a ton yet. Fascinating to see what happens there. And I saw one of you guys mention something about a running back, so I'll wait to share my thoughts then. But it's we'll see what happens. Jerry G saying happy retirement day, Carr. Hell yeah, Jerry. I mean, it's a week that fans should kind of put on their calendar, right? Happy retirement to, I believe, June 3rd? Is June 3rd, I believe, the official date for Derek Carr's retirement. So pretty good for the Saints. Jack says Saints wasted no time giving away the number 4, yet they wasted a ton of time having DA as head coach. Yeah, Kool-Aid McKinstry wearing number 4 for the Saints. Did not take long. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'm sure some people might say like, oh, the body's not even cold yet. Like, all right, it's the NFL. Guys are always on the lookout for jersey numbers. I think one thing I noticed when rookies come into the league, and obviously Kool-Aid's second year now, but when rookies come into the league, they'll ask for, what numbers are available. They'll see their options are thin, and they'll just kind of be waiting shit out. Like, if this guy gets cut, I'm grabbing that number immediately. And, Derek Carr retiring, Kool-Aid kind of strikes. And look, I kind of like the number 4 on Kool-Aid. I think, it's not every day you see it for a player in the NFL for a corner to wear number 4. It doesn't beat him wearing number 1 like he did at Bama, but obviously number 1's taken right now. So I'm cool with Kool-Aid wearing number 4. Jack says, I still don't see an issue with the Saints signing a guy like Keenan Allen to a 1-year deal. I don't think there's any issue. If it's a 1-year deal and, you're really not pushing any money into 2026, I think there's no problem with that. Jaden says, what Saints rookie are you most excited for in 2025? I'm most excited for rookie linebacker Danny Stutzman, who is yours. Look, I'm excited for Stutzman. I think the one I'm most excited for, and this doesn't mean I believe he's going to be great, but it's just the excitement factor. It has to be Tyler Shuck for me. Reason being is he plays the quarterback position. It's such a valuable spot for this team. And, I'll keep saying it till I'm blue in the face, but if Shuck's good and the Saints somehow hit on their quarterback with the 40th pick, the perception of this franchise, the trajectory of the Saints changes overnight. Like, you're not looking at them in the basement anymore. And, you start to feel like, hey, we can climb out of this dark tunnel that us Saints fans have been in for the last couple of years. So for that reason, I'm going to go Shuck. But, truthfully, Jaden, I'm excited about a lot of guys from this draft class. You mentioned Danny Stutzman. I'm very excited about him. Very excited about Kelvin Banks. I think Kelvin Banks could be a difference maker. Jonas Sanker from Virginia. Haven't heard a ton of him yet at OTAs and what he's been able to do, but he's a player I'm excited to watch in the preseason. So we'll see what happens with him. I think the Saints have added a lot of talent in this draft. We'll see if they end up panning out. That half the battle is coaching them up, but a lot of rookies to be excited about. I see Trey mentioning Devin Neal. That's another one. Really, really good, productive player at Kansas. Maybe he ends up being a nice back for the Saints, especially because they need that secondary guy to Alvin. Jerry says, it's my birthday month. Happy birthday month to you, Jerry. Hope you have a good one when that special day comes, man. Walter says, why do we ignore the fact that when healthy, Olave's been productive, and if not for concussion, would have had a 200-plus yard receiving game against the Falcons? Yeah, I don't know, man. I think part of that is just the way the NFL works. Like, I think everyone's kind of quick to move on from certain takes. And, we live in a hot take world. I'm guilty of it many times. I'm not going to act like I'm free of it. But I think for Olave, I just, there's not one thing he does that is flashy to be like a social media sensation, if that makes sense, right? Like, I don't think DK Metcalf is the most well-rounded receiver in the NFL, but he's a big dude. Probably going to get in a couple fights, maybe throw a punch and get ejected. And like that, that sells. Even Devontae Smith. I don't think Devontae Smith is better than Chris Olave personally, but he plays on the Eagles and that's a big market and they just won a Super Bowl and that sells. So look, I think Olave can quickly silence people. I think if he's healthy, he will. I think this is all it comes down to is health for him. I do think he's a really good player. I mentioned before, he had over 1,000 yards in his first 2 seasons with less than ideal quarterback situations. So he's a playmaker. He just has to stay healthy. I hope he does. Just A. Davis says, team's got a good feeling around it. I do think the vibes are definitely up. I definitely think the vibes are up. I believe that, for the Saints, does that mean wins? Not necessarily, but do I see a coach in Kellen Moore who's A, trying to establish a culture, but B, which is, I think might be just as important, it goes hand in hand, making sure that he gets kind of familiar with this New Orleans community and make sure he does his part. I think that's worthy of a round of applause. And I do think those things go hand in hand. Like, Drew Brees always says, if you love the city, he'll love you right back. I do think that matters for a first-year head coach who is trying to be the guy for a long time. So I do think the vibes are definitely up. Xavier says, if there's no physical wide receiver signing, thoughts on MT if we get him on a vet min? Reason I'm going to say no, Xavier, is no one else is actually going for him. And I think the ship has sailed for MT. Love him. Love him dearly. One of my favorite Saints players I've ever watched, truthfully. But, I think that ship has sailed personally. Bub is damn good, and he puts in the work. I do think he definitely puts in the work. There's no question about it. I hope he takes that next step, because if he does, that wide receiver room, right now I'm talking about underrated. You're lacking the amount of playmakers that you want from 1 to 4. But who knows? If Bub takes that next step, feel a little bit better about this Saints team. Just A. Davis says, similar to the Pels, I just hope the weapons can stay healthy and actually get some chemistry. I totally get that. I do think it's a little different. I think the Saints probably have a better chance, not to succeed next year. I would say the Pelicans have a better chance to succeed next year. I just think the Pels have more win now talent. But sometimes call me, I don't want to say call me old fashioned. I haven't reached that age, but call it a lame take. But I just think that the Saints are the priority in New Orleans, and maybe that's wrong of me to think that. I just think they are, and I would imagine the Saints get closer to relevancy than the Pelicans in the next couple of years, and maybe I'm way off base for it. But I do understand the comparison, right? Like, because you want to see Zion healthy with Trey Murphy, and obviously, no one wants to see DeJounte Murray go down. So I get it. They're on two different paths right now. Neither one's necessarily glamorous, though. Walter says, I think this is Kendre's year. It's not a talent thing, just a health thing. He literally makes a play every time he touches the ball. You just got to stay on the field. Couldn't agree more. But, at some point, and I kind of alluded to this today on Twitter, I don't know, when I don't want to say you give up on Kendre, but you at some point got to realize you just can't rely on him. And I'm not saying that for you. I'm just saying for the Saints, right? Because I agree with you. I think Kendre Miller, when he carries the football, it is way different than anyone else on the Saints. And that's including Alvin Kamara. I genuinely feel that way. Obviously Alvin's an older player. If Alvin was in his prime, like prime Alvin will smoke any of these dudes in the Saints backfield. But Kendre has a certain amount of patience and his ability to cut. His vision is great, gets to that second level pretty easily, and yet he just can't stay healthy. Now, could this be the year that he ends up being healthy? Yeah, it might be. Maybe some tweaks to the physical, training staff, and maybe the Saints are going to do different things in practice that will avoid those soft tissue injuries. I don't know. I can't get into the exact science behind it all, but I do agree. It will never be a talent question for Kendre Miller. It's a health question. And unfortunately, the answer to that question has been negative for many times. So, I just hope this is the year. Jaden says, who do you think will have more defensive interceptions? The Saints, the Saints defense have the season. Well, how many interceptions will the defense have as a total, Jaden? Is that what you're going for? If not, let me know. So I'll wait for you to get back to me on that one. Xavier says D-line seems to be getting thinner and quicker. Corner reports. Thoughts? I think that makes sense. Kind of lines up with what you want to have with 3-4 scheme. I don't think you want to have like slow ass defensive ends out there. And let's be honest, the Saints defensive line under the Dennis Allen era were bigger defensive ends. You're not going for speed. You're going for power. I think, look, I said this a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to stand to it. Like, this defensive line, I think, is going to be built on Chase Young and whether or not he reaches his potential. And if he doesn't, I think this is going to be a very, very, I don't want to say sorry, but a very subpar defensive line in terms of getting after the quarterback. So, I think that guys like Chase Young, rookie defensive lineman Vernon Broughton from Texas, Brian Brzee, like, those are the type of guys that I think are going to play pivotal roles, and they got to step up or else it could be pretty rough for this defensive line. Jack says, I saw Kirk Cousins, a potential June 1st cut from the Falcons on CBS Sports, and potential landing spots being the Steelers and Saints. I did see that as well, Jack. Wouldn't put any stock into it. I don't believe the Saints are going to go after Kirk Cousins. Steelers, however, I think is fascinating as all hell. If I'm the Steelers, I'm not getting into who's better, but I'd rather have Kirk Cousins and the lack of baggage that he comes with than Aaron Rodgers and the mountain of baggage that he comes with. But I don't believe the Saints will go after Kirk Cousins. So We'll see what happens there. Feel like Kool-Aid's been wanting 0, but they keep bringing back Ugo Amadi. Who knows? Or maybe he wants number 1, but obviously, at the moment, you're not getting that from Alante. But we'll see what happens. Who knows? I wouldn't be shocked if Kool-Aid changes that number one more time. Justin Davis says, has there been a noticeable change in how Kellen Moore operates and Dennis Allen? Well, I think the first thing you're going to notice, and I think this isn't really a Dennis Allen, slander Dennis Allen. I think this is just like how the NFL works. Because DA was a defensive guy, he spent way more time with his defense, not enough time at the offense, and that's just kind of how it goes, where Kellen Moore obviously is going to have his fingerprint all over the Saints offense, work very closely with the two quarterbacks that are in the battle right now. And look, I would say for the Saints, it's a whole new staff, so everything's going to be different. Brandon Staley's obviously going to have a different approach than what you had last year. I think New Orleans, they're doing a pretty good job of not tipping any hands. I think that might be a good thing. Maybe that's kind of what we got to get back to. I think the Saints have kind of had this Sean Payton mystique / everything's a mystery with everything. I wouldn't say, I think you'll find the bigger changes in the regular season. Like when the games are played schematically and, when it's gut check time, what decision does Kellen Moore make on a crucial 4th down? Like stuff like that to me is going to be more important. The practice stuff, there really isn't anything you're going to see yet other than the fact that Kellen's going to be way more hands-on with the offense than Dennis Allen ever was because DA's not an offensive guy. I would say that'd be the big one, but you're not going to see the real changes till week 1 starts, and then that's where it'll get interesting, Because I used to get on DA all the time for being very timid on 4th downs. I hope Kellen Moore and the Saints offense are more aggressive. Donald says we're going to be ass. Probably, but I'm trying to be optimistic here. Jaden says, who's your favorite Saints player of all time, not named Drew Brees? Yeah, it's a great question. Let's see. I mean, look, 7-8 years ago, I probably would have told you Marcus Colston. Now I don't know. I genuinely love watching Alvin Kamara play football. I think it's a delight to see how he's played over the course of his career. Still have a lot of love for Michael Thomas, but he wouldn't be in that upper echelon. DeMario, I think, has really cemented himself as a Saints legend. Cam Jordan obviously is a Saints legend, but I might still go Marcus Colston. A lot of Saints players that I loved though dearly over the years. Underrated guy, loved Jabari Greer growing up. But I would probably still go Colston. And part of that is just a bias thing. I went to Hofstra for school. Colston was from Hofstra. He's the last product they had from football that was worth a damn in the NFL. And great story, obviously 7th round pick to end up being a Super Bowl champion. And although never made a Pro Bowl, I think he's the most underrated wide receiver of his generation period. So I'd probably go with I'd probably go with Colston as my number 2. Olave is legit, always open. He's elite at getting separation, route running, and overall fluidity at the wide receiver position. I believe that he's a smooth operator is what I like to call him. And I just hope he's healthy. Because if he is, we'll get back to seeing him produce. What do you think the Saints should do? $57 million in salary cap they have after the DC retirement. I think, obviously, look at the wide receiver market. I think that's possible. I would not be surprised if the Saints sign Asante Samuel Jr. I think, the fact that he still hasn't been signed yet, he did visit with the Saints. He isn't expected to sign until he has a early checkup in July. Again, this is not sourced. This is just my gut feeling. If that checkup goes well for Asante Samuel Jr., I believe he'll be on the Saints in July before training camp. So, that's what I'm looking at. Maybe bringing Asante Samuel Jr. and then getting a wide receiver. I think that's how they'll spend their money and then roll over the rest into next year. I don't think the Saints have to get too cute here, I saw Kendrick get a personal chef. I think he's taking his health serious now, which is good for him. I mean, yeah, it's a big opportunity. Like you see this Saints team and this backfield, it's going to be led by Alvin. But what if Kendrick did reach his full potential? You have a 1-2 punch that could do a lot of damage this year. And in an offense for Kellen Moore, where we just saw running the football was the priority for the Eagles, and obviously it was built off their O-line. I keep saying I believe that the Saints are going to have a good O-line. Whether or not that happens, we'll see. But I think the talent is there. And if Kendrick and Alvin can form a nice 1-2 punch, it'll look good for this team. Justin Davis says, what's the major holdup with Asante Samuel Jr.? Right now for him, he's trying to figure out what's going on. I believe it's a neck injury. I'll check to be sure again, but I believe it is a neck injury for him. Let's see if I can pull it up here. But he might need neck surgery. So that is the holdup here for Asante Samuel Jr. So again, Saints have been down this road before with Chase Young. I don't know if they want to go down this road again for a player that's not as, let's say, talented as a Chase Young, but they've been down this road before. So we'll see what happens. Jana says, what I mean to say was, how many interactions will the Saints defense have this season? Interactions or interceptions? Which one are we going for? I'm guessing you're saying interceptions. Let me pull up the number from last year, because there is a player the Saints lost this offseason that I think is going to affect their interception total in a big way. That player is Paulson Adebo. Because Paulson Adebo, the one thing I'll say about that dude, will get like 15 PI penalties and then, 5 interceptions. So makes plays, sometimes to a detriment, but he's a damn good playmaker. All right, so the Saints last year as a team had 14 interceptions. All right, Adebo, you lose the 3 because I forgot he only played in 7 games, but that's kind of crazy. 3 interceptions, 7 games is really, really good efficiency. Ty Matthew, a year older, but Justin Reed comes into the picture. I can see Justin Reed having 2 or 3. See what happens by Jonas Sanker. Alontae Taylor's really not an interception guy. He just really isn't. You just look at his career. He's got 2 picks in 3 seasons, so not really an interception guy. Could Kool-Aid McKinstry get his first career interception? We'll see. Had 6 pass breakups last year, so if it was 14 last year, I might go a little bit under that. I don't want to, but maybe 12. Justin Davis says, has Rattler done enough to be considered the starter? Is everything kind of even? I would say it's kind of even right now. I think Rattler's done well and Shuck has done well, and I think the Saints are actually really pleased with what they've gotten out of the 2 young quarterbacks. I do believe that no decision will be made before the preseason because they got to play in these games, granted against vanilla coverages for the most part, but they want to see how they handle those live bullets. And I can say, though, so far, the Saints are pretty pleased with what they've seen. They like the way Rattlers perform. I think Shuck is doing exactly what they hoped so far. So I wouldn't say Rattlers pulled away. I wouldn't say Shucks pulled away. To your point, I really think it's kind of dead square in the middle. So we'll see if either one can pull away. As I'd say probably August is when you'll start to see some traction. Pablo says, how do you view the NFC South as of this moment? Do you think it's winnable given what we saw last year in the addition of this new coaching staff? I think a lot of it comes down to health, Pablo. I don't know if it is in the cards for the Saints this year. I've said I think the Saints are going to be 6-11, maybe 5-12, and I don't think that gets you a division title, even if your division's terrible. But what I will say, and I do like the question, I don't think the NFC South is that good, and that's why I keep getting confused as to why there's like this notion league-wide that the Saints are definitely going to be the worst team in the league next year when they're going to play 6 games against opponents in their division that I don't think are that special. I don't think Atlanta's ready to take this jump that a lot of people want them or think they could take. I don't think the Buccaneers are going to keep this up what they've done the last couple of years. At some point, there's a drop-off from losing offensive talent on the coaching staff. They lost Dave Canales to replace him with Liam Cohen. Now they lost Liam Cohen. It's very hard to continue replacing OCs. It's very hard. I look at the Bucks, don't think they're a great spot. And then the Panthers, this whole Panthers situation, like everyone thinks they're going to take a leap because they played respectable football in the last 2 months of the year. And, they played respectable football. They still played losing football. So do I think this division's winnable? I will say yes, because I think it's a bad division. Do I think the Saints will win the division, though? I don't. I think they're going to win 5 to 6 games. But it is a winnable division. There's no question about it. I don't think any of those teams are special. And this isn't my, because I put your Saints hat on and be biased. No, I just don't think these teams are that good. I really don't. Like, people can try to sell me on the Falcons all they want. I'm not buying it. I'm not going to. What do you think Kellen Moore will do more on offense, do more of the running game or the passing game? I think the running game will probably be the focal point. Built the O-line. Alvin's still a stud. See if they get anything out of guys like Kendrick, Devin Neal, but I think running game. Quick non-Saints question. No shot the Lions are as good right now. So much turnover and no Ragnow. How long can they keep this up? NFC is going to be wild. Yeah, look, I think if there's a year for a team to have a major drop-off, I think there's 2 teams in the same division. I think that's the Lions and the Vikings. And the Vikings, the reason I say that is the Vikings won a lot of games last year where, and it could have gone either way. And the league is always a year-to-year thing, and a lot of games are one-possession games. But if you look at what the Vikings did last year, a lot of their wins were one-possession wins, like down to the wire. Beat Seattle in Seattle by a field goal. Beat Green Bay the next week by 2 points. So those 2 that swing your way. Beat the Bears in overtime by a field goal. Then the week after that, they beat the Cardinals by 1 point at home. So Jaguars win 12-7. Colts win 13-21. You beat the Jets 23-17 on a game-winning interception from Rodgers. The week before that, they beat the Packers 31-29. So, with a quarterback in J.J. McCarthy, who's now going to be a de facto rookie quarterback, even though it's his second year, I think they're going to take a step back. And the Lions, you lose, almost all of your coaching staff. Aaron Glenn obviously going away, Ben Johnson going away, and then they're plucking assistants with them. So it's not just one or two coaches. You lose like 10 coaches out of this. So, I do think the Lions are going to take a step back. I think there's so much talent that I still think they're going to be a respectable football team. But them and the Vikings were both, monsters in the regular season. I just don't think that's going to be the case this year, topped with the fact that Chicago should be better. And, the Packers are always a respectable team under Matt LaFleur. Justin Davis says the division is really winnable, especially if Kellen Moore is a quality head coach. I do agree with that. And look, to your point, because you said if you get competent quarterback play and defense performs like vets, you'll be in most games with the easiest schedule. I do think that's part of it, right? And I think that's why the Saints are so disrespected is there's an unknown at coach and quarterback. But man, if you tell me you get middling performances from both, the Saints are going to be in most games. Again, the schedule's not that good. Jim says, if you were the GM, what would you do to get us competitive again? Just got to read this response real quick. If I were Mickey Loomis, I'd fire myself. Look, I think for the Saints, it's pretty simple. I think you got to start hitting on your fucking picks. I think financially the Saints are doing the right stuff now, right? Didn't make a ton of moves this offseason to burden them. Only real signing they made that was a splash was Justin Reed, and I think it was a huge position of need, and I think Justin Reed's going to be a good leader for the Saints. So, I think you just got to hit on your freaking picks. I know that sounds way easier said than done, and it seems like a very easy cop-out answer, but a lot of the Saints' failures are due to their lack of success in the draft. Whiffing on a guy like Peyton Turner, whiffing on Trevor Penning, who you traded future picks for, not getting anything out of Isaiah Foskey, who was a top 40 pick. So, I think for me, that's kind of where I'm at. If the team is terrible, do they finally become sellers at the deadline? I mean, the question is, what would you sell? What are you selling? Is it DeMario? Is it Cam? Like, is that what you're going for? And they got to play well enough for teams to want them. So, no, I don't even know if you just become sellers. I think you kind of you go through it. And the reason I say that is the Saints are finally close to being, financially free. They're very, very close finally. And they don't have to make any rash decisions. They don't have to pull the plug on things. I think you just kind of go through this year, see where you're at with Kellen Moore schematically, see where he's at from a culture building perspective. I don't think they have to jump the gun and be sellers. Last year was different because Marshawn, the contract situation was important. He wasn't going to be part of the future, so that makes sense. As for the Saints, though, like, who's that guy? If there's a guy this year that makes sense for them to move on from, okay, cool. We'll talk about it. But I don't know. I don't see that guy right now because, even Cam, DeMario, like, they want to stay in New Orleans. Like, they just want to ride this thing out at this point. I don't know if they want to be traded. So that to me is where I'm at with this situation. 100% with you on not buying the Panthers. Why is it assume they're awesome and they got their guy in Bryce? They don't really know. I totally agree with you, man. It's all built on mediocre football with what they played. Who is your sleeping player for the Saints? Mine is Bub Memes. Who is yours? So, like, who do I think is going to take that next level? Is that what we're going for? If that's the case, like, guy who I think could take that next step for the Saints. Oh man, I don't even know if it would be on the offensive side, but if we're going to keep it on the offensive side, I'd like to think this is the year Juwan Johnson plays consistent football, not great football, but consistent football. Kellen Moore and the coaching staff for some reason made a huge pitch to just bring him back. I hope to God they have a nice plan for him. So we'll see what happens. But the Saints got work to do for sure, and we'll see what Bub Memes. I think Bub Memes is an interesting playmaker, and he's a guy in the preseason. He's going to have his snaps and chances to shine. So we'll see. We'll see. Not a ton, guys. Like I mentioned, this week's been fairly quiet for the Saints. I will absolutely take that. I do think they're going to start making moves though, contract wise. I think that in July, if Asante Samuel's healthy, they'll go after him. I would not be surprised if the Saints sign a wide receiver in the next couple of days / weeks. So I'd say keep your eye on all that. Wouldn't be shocked if the Saints make some noise at some point. But for now, it's been pretty steady, just focusing on the quarterbacks, focusing on Kellen Moore, what he's building there, and hopefully it ends up being good. So we'll see what happens. Regardless, though, we'll have you covered here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. So make sure you guys subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really helps out. If you didn't, make sure you leave a like on the video. We really, really appreciate it here at BKM. And until next time, I'll see you guys here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday night, man. Appreciate you guys coming on.